Jimmy Garoppolo, he's allowed to miss mandatory minicamp. Deebo Samuel not allowed to miss mandatory minicamp, but it's looking like he is not going to show up. We've got scouting reports on some undrafted rookie centers, Dohnovan West out of Arizona State and Jason Poe from Mercer, coming up right now.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker with you. If you don't know us, I am an NFL analyst, been writing for fantasy stuff, PFF, covering the 49ers for a while here. Also the co-host of the Peacock and Williamson NFL show daily right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Former AFL and NFL cornerback Eric Crocker, my co-host here, and also the host of Locked On NFL Draft right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. At BD Peacock on Twitter, at Eric_Crocker. Feel free to say hi to us there, or write a little note in the comments on YouTube. We appreciate everybody making Locked On 49ers your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's what we do, and there's always news, it seems like, every day with the San Francisco 49ers. So before we break down the scouting reports, strengths and weaknesses of a couple of very interesting rookie undrafted free agent centers, maybe guard center hybrids with Dohnovan West and Jason Poe, it has been announced that Jimmy Garoppolo has been excused from mandatory minicamp. So not mandatory for him. He will not be hanging around looking over Trey Lance's shoulder. He wasn't going to be throwing or anything anyway, but he's not going to be around as the 49ers still try to trade Jimmy Garoppolo. If it wasn't already very clear, it's pretty clear the 49ers are trying to move on from Jimmy, but they don't want to cut him quite yet, and are hoping to work out some sort of a trade so Trey Lance can be the guy. Probably the least surprising news of the week, right, Croc?
Yeah. How do you think this ends? Because everything that's kind of coming out, some of these things, to me, it continues to lead towards they are all in on Trey Lance. That's the vibe I'm getting. I'm getting the vibe that they're on Trey Lance. When you listen to the teammates and how they're talking about Trey Lance and the leadership role that he has taken on, and they believe it. It's like, man, like, they like the growth. They like where he's at. And, you know, a lot of us tried to rush the process, me included, like, oh, he needed to play last year. Maybe they did right. I don't know. We'll never know what was the right or wrong way to do it. But I do know this. However he's handling it, it almost seems like he's handling it to the best way possible with whatever they were expecting out of him this offseason. And sounds like he's the guy. And it's like, Jimmy Garoppolo, you know what? Don't show up for OTAs. Jimmy Garoppolo, you know what? Go rehab somewhere else. Jimmy Garoppolo, you know what? Don't even come to minicamp. You are excused. We don't want you around. Every chance they get to tell people, look, we want to trade him. We're trying to trade him. John Lynch was just talking about it. We've heard Kyle Shanahan talk about it. They don't want him on the team, and not because they don't like the guy, not because they don't like the players. Just we spent a lot of draft capital on this young guy. We like where he's at. That's our guy. People are getting behind him. We like what we're seeing with wherever he's at right now in his growth process, and we want to continue to build on that. And again, every chance they get, it seems like, oh no, we're trying to push Jimmy Garoppolo out. So I want to ask you, what the hell is next? What happens? Do you just tell him, hey, don't come to this, don't come to that, rehab somewhere else? Which, I mean, he might have rehabbed somewhere else anyways. But maybe not. If he was the guy, I think maybe he'd be in Santa Clara. But all right, you know what? But you know what? Don't come to OTAs. Don't come to mini camps. Don't come to any of that. But, oh, you know what? Come to training camp. Do you think that happens?
No chance. No, Jimmy's not coming to training camp unless there's some, knock on wood injury to Trey Lance. Jimmy's not coming to camp, and he'll be either released or traded at some point. And I think the 49ers right now are probably realizing they're going to have to, at some point, release him and get his money off the books. And that definitely won't happen until Jimmy Garoppolo's cleared. So maybe once he's actually cleared, can throw, maybe he goes and makes some visits with some teams. Maybe the trade talk starts up again. Maybe the 49ers at that point, no injury guarantee anymore, so they can actually get, do the whole contract and lose the whole thing and release him then. So at this point, they're just holding on. And the more everybody, we've seen this with other players. We saw it with James Bradbury. Is the more that every team knows you're trying to get rid of a guy and maybe he's got a big contract number, the less likely those teams are to trade for him. Someone's going to wait for you to cut him, and then they're going to sign him. So that'll probably be what happens with Jimmy G. And I think the 49ers are hoping it's not the Seattle Seahawks. They end up picking him up there, which might be just a little extra incentive for the 49ers to not necessarily cut him any sooner than they have to, or that makes sense. And they could hold him longer, even if he's not at training camp and he's excused. They could hold on to him for a while. They just got to get that contract off the books before the season starts. But it wouldn't be smart to bring him to training camp. So that gives him 6 weeks to figure something out, which is plenty of time.
I was just going to say, it doesn't seem like a whole lot of time.
Well, as long as this thing's been dragged out, at that point, it's like, okay, let's just release Jimmy Garoppolo and we'll see what ends up happening with him. But as soon as he's cleared, that's going to be where that's a big delineation. That's a big line of, something could possibly happen, whether it's trade or Jimmy getting released. What about Deebo? We think about Deebo. He's in San Francisco. He's at the Warriors game. Kyle Shanahan was at the Warriors game Sunday. He's just down the road. Why doesn't he just pop on into mandatory minicamp and not get fined, Croc?
Nah, man. I mean, he's kind of staying pat with what he has said all along. And I think, a lot of us thought it would just kind of blow over after the NFL draft. Okay, he's still a 49er, so he will be a 49er for this upcoming season at the very least. But he is kind of standing tall with his decision of, I don't want to be a 49er. And at some point, it becomes a little worrisome. Now, I think most people would tell you, well, they didn't expect him at the rookie minicamp. They didn't expect him at OTAs, but didn't expect him to be at minicamp, the mandatory minicamp either. Still, to me, it's the lack of at least knowledge of the situation from the fan base. Maybe Kyle Shanahan, who has said, hey, I talked to all my players. So maybe he's not worried. And if he's not worried, then I'll be fine. But it does seem a little weird that there's just no communication from what we've been to or what we understand. And
right.
It sounds like he has continued to kind of push the whole thing. I don't want to be a 49er. So that's the last thing that we've heard from him.
Yeah, and this is sort of the last real stand for Deebo, because once training camp comes, I don't see him, because this is just one fine. It's mandatory mini camp, whatever. Then you got 6 weeks, and you're not going to rack up any fines in between. So it was, the whole time the playbook would be, even if he wasn't really unhappy, but he's trying to get the new deal or whatever, you don't show up to any of the OTAs. Mandatory mini camp, you can handle that fine. But once it gets to training camp, you start getting hit every day with these fines. That starts to have to become either a really contentious holdout or probably a hold in. And so that's, I think, what really would hurt the 49ers the most, is just have Deebo Samuel show up, but have a fake injury. And then it starts to get silly, and it probably would, maybe spill over to the other players, and it wouldn't be a very good situation. So hopefully the 49ers can get something figured out before the end of July.
Hey, real quick, we're talking about Deebo Samuel, and I saw this tweet kind of floating around, and it was, a trio of guys. You had a trio of 49ers and a trio of Minnesota Vikings. So I kind of just want your reaction real quick. Jerry Rice, Terrell Owens, and Deebo Samuel, or Randy Moss, Chris Carter, and Justin Jefferson. Which trio are you taking?
Well, I'm obviously taking the 49ers trio, but my immediate reaction to that, my immediate question is Deebo the third of the 49ers trio? He's only had the one season. Does John Taylor go in there? Gene Washington, Dwight Clark? Why is Deebo the automatic third? Or are you just trying to throw one current player with two older players? Is that the idea?
That's what I'm assuming. I'm assuming they are like, all right, Justin Jefferson, Deebo Samuel, they're kind of drafting around that same year. I think Deebo Samuel 1 year ahead of Justin Jefferson. So they use those two guys, which, I mean, Justin Jefferson, he's been 2-time second team All-Pro in his first 2 years in the NFL.
I mean, that's really hard. I mean, Randy Moss, Jerry Rice, you're talking the two best ever right there, right?
I really like Terrell Owens.
Right, but then T.O. So now you get T.O. versus
no, but
Chris
you're saying that you're saying that like just Randy Moss is just. See, I don't know who's better between Terrell Owens and Randy Moss.
Well, look, there's been a lot of arguments about Jerry Rice versus Randy Moss, and it's clear to everybody listening to this podcast that Jerry Rice is 1, but I think it's pretty clear that Randy Moss is 2, and then I put T.O. 3. So yeah,
really,
I would shuffle him in there, but I think T.O.'s clearly over Chris Carter. So
but I know, but I don't see it that way with Terrell Owens and Randy Moss. I think this is what I like. Just, and I grew up on these guys, right? Like, I vividly remember really both of these guys' rookie years in the NFL. Like I watched their entire careers. Randy Moss, he was amazing. I mean, his nickname the Freak. They got the whole acronym, they got the whole thing after him getting mossed and all that stuff. I feel like because of how Terrell Owens dominated games, it was just so much, it was different than Randy Moss. And maybe it wasn't as simple as, hey, I'm just going to run right by everybody and just throw the ball up and I'm going to catch it down there every time, right? And T.O., it was more so, I'm just going to catch a slant, throw you off of me, and then outrun everyone. Like, I'm bigger at 6'3", 220 pounds, and faster than everyone else on the field. And he just won in a different way, but he was just as dominant. Like, just as dominant.
Yeah.
If you take away the, calling Jeff Garcia weird names, doing sit-ups in the parking lot of the Dallas Cowboys, like, if the whole thing with Donovan McNabb, if you take that, we're just talking about the football player, right? Who's the better football player? I don't know who is better. And their numbers reflect that. Like, their numbers they're right here. Like, everything is, they're in the same range.
And Owens played better later. Like, Moss got washed quickly once his best trick was gone, right?
I don't know. I don't know. It was kind of weird how it happened. I went to a game, my first NFL game ever. It was the 49ers. I mean, it was not 49ers, excuse me. It was the Rams. Gosh. It was the Raiders against the Browns.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, like my first ever NFL game, but whatever. Randy Moss is playing. I get to go watch Randy Moss. And whatever version of Randy Moss that wasn't what I thought I was getting. Now, fast forward to, 2 years later or whatever, he goes and scores 23 touchdowns or whatever for the Patriots. And then obviously after that, there was like kind of like this another decline and, obviously a brief stint with the 49ers during that time. But again, there was never really that drop off with Terrell Owens. Matter of fact, he's in some leagues scoring touchdowns right now.
Right.
Terrell Owens, even late in his career, he was like always leading his teams in receptions and yards and things like that. So I don't know, man. They really low-key disrespectful of you. I'm not gonna lie. A lot of people though, they will say, "Oh,
you think
Randy
it's
Moss."
Disrespectful to call Terrell Owens the third greatest receiver of all time?
I think it's disrespectful with how you just put Randy Moss, right? Like, you don't even have to think about it. You said he's clear and far. Like, you just said it was just like there's nothing in conversation.
If there was a Vikings fan on this podcast right now, he would say it's disrespectful to Moss to say that Jerry Rice is clearly ahead of him.
Because people are talking about, well, who's the more purely talented receiver? Now, if you ask that question, that could be different. But as far as like the best receiver right now, like Tom Brady's not the most talented quarterback ever. But Tom Brady is, without a doubt, the best quarterback ever, right? Like, he's not the most talented of any, and that's Jerry Rice. Where, yeah, he might not be 6'4" and run 4.2 and just throw his hand up and throw, but he was the best. There was nobody that worked harder. There was nobody that was more successful. There was nobody that put up the numbers he did in his prime or later. He's catching for over 1,000 yards at 42 years old. Like, come on, man. No. Like, the Vikings fans, they be tripping.
Yeah, that's why I think Jerry's in a different category. You can't even start talking about.
He had 2 careers. Like, when you look at some of these guys' numbers that have put up crazy numbers with Julio Jones and all these, it's like Antonio Brown. You have to have, at whatever pace you are on, you have to have another career of those same exact numbers, and you're not doing it.
Yeah. When about the time Randy Moss was washed at 31 years old, Jerry Rice had another Hall of Fame career from that point on.
Jerry Rice at 33 had 1,800 yards. Like,
Yep. All right. You're preaching to the choir probably with this argument. We got to talk centers, but it's going to be fun debating some of these things and talking about some of these all-time 49ers greats, because tomorrow, Croc, is the beginning of our all-time 49ers draft, and I have a feeling some of those names are going to pop up pretty soon at the beginning of that all-time 49ers draft with me, you, and Wink. But next, we got to get to undrafted centers for the 49ers. These guys have a huge opportunity now with a pretty wide open center competition, I think, in training camp to at least carve out a backup role and maybe a potential starting role for Jason Poe and Donovan West, undrafted free agent center scouting reports coming up next. But first, I got to let the folks out there know about Blue Nile. If you have a special someone in your life that you're trying to buy some jewelry for, the place to go is BlueNile.com. They can help you find exactly what it is that you want to find, because like it's so hard. It is so hard for me to do that kind of shopping, to find something that it's just for whatever reason, it doesn't work in my mind to figure out what the right thing would be. And that's why they have jewelry experts on hand 24/7 at BlueNile.com, no matter what you're looking for, to help you find that special gift for that special person at the budget that you require. BlueNile.com. 24/7 chat. You can chat on the phone with them as well to find something to help you celebrate all of life's special moments, creating the custom engagement ring of her dreams, gifting a classic and timeless jewelry piece, all at prices you won't find at a traditional jeweler. So make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On 49ers listeners will get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This is a podcast exclusive that includes engagement as well. So use code Locked On. That is promo code Locked On. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. So shop stress-free and find your forever piece. Go to BlueNile.com today. And go to rockauto.com if you need anything that involves auto parts. I was blown away at how easy it was to navigate, find a fender cover that was blown off of my car that I thought was going to cost hundreds of dollars to fix, and I'd have to take my car into the shop. No, I went to rockauto.com and found the exact part I needed for my exact vehicle, $40, and I was able to fix it myself with ease. I was blown away that I was able to do that, because I am not a car guy. So I didn't go to a chain store and pay 50%, 100% markup for that very same part. I didn't take it into the car dealership where I'd be paying hundreds of dollars of labor. And who knows if they had a part in stock. Almost every time I go to the dealership, they tell me it takes weeks to get some parts in. Not at rockauto.com. They have a huge selection. They have exactly what you're looking for. And they've been helping do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years online, a family-owned business, and Rock Auto prices are always reliably low for every customer. So whether it's a fender cover, a brake part, tail lamps, motor oil, new carpet for your interior, you can find it at rockauto.com. So explore the website today. Go to rockauto.com. Let them know that Locked On sent you in their How Did You Hear About Us box. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. Also, one more thing I want to let everybody know, there is a survey out there right now. It's a network-wide survey, and you can help us out by letting us know what you like, what you don't like about all of your favorite Locked On podcasts. All you got to do is go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey right now to get started. Won't take very long, and everybody that completes the survey can qualify for one of 10 $100 Ticketmaster gift cards. Again, to take that audience survey, go to lockedonpodcasts.com/survey, and we appreciate your help on that one. Dohnovan West, Croc, undrafted center out of Arizona State. Some people thought he could get into the mid-round range, even as high as late day 2. I've seen a lot of 4th, 5th round draft projections from some of the experts I trust as far as the scouting reports go for Dohnovan West, but he slid all the way out of the draft completely, and the 49ers signed him and gave him a little bit of cash to sign as a priority free agent after the draft. 6'3", 296 pounds. He's a Southern California kid. We've been talking a lot about older prospects. He's a younger prospect, only played 3 years at Arizona State, just shy of 21 years old. And so he's a younger prospect, played 3 years, came out early, probably very surprised himself to go undrafted, as were some draft nicks. Croc, what did you see when you put on the tape of Dohnovan West at Arizona State?
One, when he was deciding to come out, he probably should have talked to my guy, Tony Pauline. I do a podcast in the offseason, one episode a week with my guy, Tony Pauline, on this draft show with the New York Giants. And we talked about him. And that was one thing he said, I don't think this kid should get drafted. And that was the first time I had heard that, because most people were having him more of a day 2 type guy. And I think 49er fans, when I do like these little mock drafts on my YouTube channel, oh, you got to get Dohnovan West there. I mean, we're talking about potentially 2nd round at 61, definitely 3rd round, especially with one of those comp picks. They're like, you got to get Dohnovan West center, etc. Well, he went more towards what my guy Tony Pauline was saying, which was undrafted. Now, as far as what I was seeing on the film, and I remember watching him and just thinking, I don't see bad. Now, part of it could be this. Center is a position that's not, it's a premium position in the sense of what they're asked to do, but not in the sense of how they're valued. So a lot of times you're not seeing centers go first round, right? Definitely not like a high first round. Like, when's the last time you've seen a center go in the top 10? When's the last time you've seen a center go in the top 20? What about in the first round in general, right? Like, that's something that just it's very rare. You just don't see happen much at all, even whether it's a guard or center. So he happens to be a center. So the value's not quite there. And then when you watch him, I'd say the thing that jumped out to me right away was, well, he's not doesn't play very strong, right? He's not knocking guys back, which is fine. And especially depending on the 49ers and their offense and how they do their blocking on the offensive line. A lot of stuff is in unison, kind of moving, and then it's on the back to kind of decide, okay, do I cut off this guy's butt or this guy's butt, right? Like, just depending on how he wants to run it there. So he's not a power guy. He doesn't move guys. But I thought one thing that was good was his anchor is pretty good, which you didn't see him get powered back a whole lot. I thought when moving and trying to get to the next level, kind of miss guys in space a little bit. And sometimes that's harder for guys. But for a guy that is under 300 pounds and at 6'3", like you just said, you would like to see him move well in space and kind of get to those next guys and kind of cream them at the next level. I didn't see quite that kind of mean streak that I saw from like Creed Humphrey, right? Creed Humphrey when he was getting drafted as a center to the Kansas City Chiefs. And I remember watching like, damn, like, y'all see what this guy's doing?
Yeah,
big, nasty. Yeah, I mean, it was nasty. He was driving guys. I didn't see that from West. Now, I think there are these expectations that maybe he can be the future center for a long time as a 49er. I think if he was drafted in the third round, people would still view him that way. He went undrafted, so they don't. But I think as the 49ers, maybe getting a guy that they really liked that was projected to go, fourth, fifth round in that range, especially at center. That's good. That's good value there. Maybe even better value to get a guy that could potentially play to that level for the 49ers, and you got him undrafted.
Yeah, I remember when I first watched him, I was like, okay, there's some stuff to like. And I wasn't blown away, and he wasn't one of my favorite targets for the 49ers in that day 2 range. But, I did think he was at least an early day 3 guy. And then when I watched him more recently, post-draft, I think it's pretty clear to see why he fell that far and maybe completely undrafted. You mentioned part of it. It's not a premium position, and how many just backup centers are there in the league? And I think that really works against him because most teams only dress 7 guys on game day. And so you've got to have backup center, backup guard, backup tackle covered by those 2 extra backup offensive linemen that aren't starting, right? You got 5 starters, you got 2 backups if you're going to dress 7, which happens a lot. So if you're carrying a just center backup, a lot of teams don't do that. So you've got to have a versatile player there. So can he cross-train at guard? Does he even project well at guard? And he doesn't. So I think a lot of teams ended up seeing a prospect that doesn't wow you across the board, that projects as just a center and just a backup center. That's a player that you're not trying to draft because you don't know if you even have a roster spot for that player. So that really worked against West. And it's funny, Croc, because I've talked about this a lot. The scouting part is easy. You went down a list of things. It was almost my exact list of everything I saw when I was taking notes of Dohnovan West. Pretty good anchor. He doesn't get pushed back a lot, but he's not powerful and doesn't win a lot either. Not a lot of wow plays, not a lot of wow losses. He seems pretty athletic and he gets out on the move all right, but he doesn't really arrive with bad intentions, and sometimes just misses altogether when he gets out there on the move. So it's like he checks a lot of the boxes, but not at a high level. And I don't know if there's a calling card to his game. He's just kind of solid. And if you're drafting a guy who you don't project to be a starter in the NFL, it's really hard. And then you have to look at how he would become a starter in the NFL. He would have to get either probably just a lot bigger and a lot stronger. Does he have that ability with his frame? And he looks like he should weigh a lot more than 296 pounds. So is he a body? Does he have the type of body that can transform and he can become this, bigger, sort of a different guy? And so that's where there's a lot of projection involved. And I think he's solid, and I think he could potentially develop into a guy. And maybe there's an opening now for him to make the roster and basically have Jake Brendel's role from last year behind Mac. But there's just nothing about his game that really wows you, even though he doesn't really get beat either. So it's like, it's good and bad. He's just kind of a solid prospect across the board. And clearly the NFL thought he was a backup caliber center, and a lot of teams just don't have room on their roster for just a pure only center backup.
Right. You don't see like maybe the potential like freakish upside to be a starter, but it doesn't mean that he can't be good, right? And I think we want to make sure that we make that clear, right? You talked about there not being that like real glaring weakness in his game, just overall solid. And if he can get to the NFL and potentially be overall just solid, that's solid, right? You can win with that. Think of a guy like Daniel Brunskill, and Brunskill has filled in a lot. And I didn't remember this, but gosh, I just saw a stat. I think 2020, Brunskill played like half the season at center, right? And I don't think anybody would have said like, oh man, Brunskill played at center. He was just terrible. But this is a guy that was just in the AAF or whatever league he was playing in prior to being a San Francisco 49er. I think he was a guy who was like undrafted, played some like, what did he play, like tight end or something like that in college, or, moved over, played more offensive line. So there is a scenario where this guy ends up being a Daniel Brunskill and plays a long time. If there's anybody that can see a fit for their offensive line, I think it's Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers are figuring out how a guy fits in there. There was somebody that tweeted us, and it was directed towards me, as saying, well, Eric Crocker just doesn't think that there's any issues with the offensive line. And that's not what I'm saying at all. I just think that Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers somehow, some way with their philosophy have done a good job of masking guys who aren't these premium big-time players, but they've gotten solid production out of them.
Yeah, Ben Garland was another one at center that kind of just showed up and was like, well, this guy's actually pretty good. Daniel Brunskill. Dohnovan West is a hell of a lot better prospect than Daniel Brunskill was coming out, who was a bulked up tight end that didn't have a position, had to go to the AAF to figure things out. So yeah, it's there's definitely a potential for Dohnovan West, and he was a priority free agent for a reason for the 49ers. There is definitely potential for him to become something. I think he's just got to get, stronger and bigger and continue to work. And he's probably got to have some guard, and he did play some guard in college. He played 11 games at right guard as a freshman. Then he played left guard for 4 games in 2020. And then he was a center for the entirety of his final year there and was second team all Pac-12. So, he's played a little bit across the offensive line, but he's definitely got to get bigger and stronger if he's going to play guard. And then you look at when he showed up at 296 pounds at the combine and still didn't put up very good numbers. He had, 5.27 40-yard dash. He had a 4.81 short shuttle and a 7.82 3-cone at his pro day, 21 bench press reps. It's just
not very strong.
Just the base tools you're working with didn't excite teams clearly. But man, again, like he had a pretty good anchor, and he was pretty good positional blocker and got his assignments done and showed some athleticism on tape. So there's some things to work with. Just no wow traits really, and almost puts you to sleep as a prospect. No big time wins, no big time losses from what I saw on his tape.
I think as a 49er fan, you can be excited about being able to get him as an undrafted rookie free agent, as opposed to if they would have used a 3rd round pick on him.
Yep. All right. Hey, we got to move on and talk a little bit about Jason Poe. There's a lot less tape to grind, so maybe not as long of a conversation, but a very different prospect from Dohnovan West. I want to let the folks out there know about Bet Online first, because at Bet Online, you can bet on tons of 49ers and NFL action, even though we're months away from NFL football. A ton of NFL futures at Bet Online, your number one source for all your betting stats, sports information, as well as, of course, wagering. NBA Finals, NHL Hockey Conference Finals. There's Major League Baseball all summer long, all kinds of fighting news, MMA, UFC, boxing to bet on. Bet Online is your continued source for wagering information, including live betting, esports, and Vegas casino games as well. So you can bet on a game, and while you watch the game, play a little blackjack or poker at Bet Online. So get over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action at Bet Online, where the game starts. Jason Poe's fun. I had to go to the Senior Bowl to try to find some more clips of him, because there's not a lot from his earlier days at Lenore-Rhyne or from Mercer, where he last played. But there is one fun, and like you can't go to highlights to scout these players, and it's not what we do, Croc. But I did run across one fun highlight clip of Jason Poe, and it's just entitled "The Best Pulling Guard in College Football." Just seeing him, a ball of energy, run around out there. He looks like a fullback in motion. That's what he looks like. And so we talk about how Dohnovan West sometimes would, be able to get out to the second level, but not really finish the block out there. Jason Poe's got radar, and he finds guys and he hits guys in the open field. And he's fun to watch. And that's why some people say, this guy could play some reps at fullback even, but he didn't play any center. And I think center kind of, just because of his size at 6 feet, 300 pounds, kind of has to be a center in the NFL, but he played guard in college. So it might take him some time just to be used to handling the football and develop into that center. So to me, he's most likely going to be a practice squad guy, but guard, center versatility, and he's got big hands that's, you know, even though he's not the biggest guy in the world, to be able to handle the football. 6 feet and 5/8 of an inch, 300 pounds exactly. He had 10 and 5/8 inch hands, which is really big hands, which is, you know, a nice thing to have for a center who's going to be handling football. And then ran a 4.9 flat 40 at 300 pounds. So the guy can move, and you see it on tape. This guy flies out of his stance, gets downfield, and can hit people in the open field like a linebacker running down a running back.
It was interesting to watch the Mercer film. And like you said, wasn't much out there to watch. But again, this is another guy that we watched on the draft show with Tony Pauline and those guys. And one thing that I remember seeing, like his bent for a guy that's shorter in stature there, like for an offensive lineman just in general, like let alone an interior offensive lineman, they don't have to be the tallest, but 6 feet. I asked the question too. I said, has there been a guy at that height, you know, just not even be good, just play guard, like, because 6 feet offensive lineman, you just don't see that typically. I mean, those guys are typically 6'2" and up, but regardless, okay, whatever, he's playing in the interior. I thought he was a little stiff with his bend at like the knees and hips. So for a guy that you would like to see win with leverage, I thought he kind of lacked that at the line of scrimmage a little bit. I don't know. Again, this is just me going back on what I remember watching with Mercer on the offensive line. There was a lot of running going on. Felt like it was kind of hard to really find like some like legit clean pass sets. There was like a lot of movement type stuff that they did. But I think you're banking on more of the athlete that you're getting. And there were a lot of guys, talent evaluators, that really liked him and thought he would be a day 3 pick. You end up being able to get him undrafted. And I think, you know, we're talking about him, between the difference between him and West, right? And West, it was like, okay, like solid football player, you know, maybe doesn't have the highs upsides. We'll see what we get from him. I think Poe, it's a little different. I think you see like, hey, it maybe doesn't fit from a measurable standpoint what the NFL is asking for some of their guys as far as height goes, but movement skills, like you said, the radar when pulling, some of the things, you know, being able to play out in space. And then we saw the clips of him. If he does want to be a fullback, he can legit be a fullback. I'm 100% sold that if they said, you know what, we want to line him up at the fullback position, he can be that. He has that versatility as well.
He can catch.
Oh, no, it's real. Like, he was smooth. I was really kind of shocked and kind of blown away by the athlete he was in space, just kind of running routes and how smooth it looked. If you didn't tell me that it was a guard, if you were just like, hey, what position does he play? I'd say, well, he plays running back, because that's how smooth he looked. He just looked like, okay, well, maybe he's like a nature on means. He's just a bigger running back in the backfield. But no, like, he's a legit interior offensive lineman. But he moved extremely well, very fluid, terrific pass catching ability, soft hands. At least, again, we're talking about a highlight kind of thing with him, showing him work out. But I mean, it was smooth and plucking the ball out the air. And you just talked about the big hands, and it just looked so natural. I think he's a legit athlete. So if it does work out, you know, and they find a niche for him, he's somebody that could potentially be like a long-time starter, just because it's such high upside. And he's passed over because, well, he went to Lenore Ryan, he went to Mercer, and he was barely 6 feet tall.
If he was 6'3", we wouldn't be having this conversation. If everything else was exactly the same except for he was 6'3" on paper, be like, oh, cool, got drafted in whatever, 4th round, right, 3rd round, and you know he's gonna compete at guard for somebody or center. So for that reason, I like him. I wouldn't even mind seeing him play defensive line a little bit. He's not shaped that different from the guy we talked about yesterday, Kalia Davis, the 6th round pick. And to me, that's like some of the value he could bring as a practice squad player. You could line him up on the offensive line. He could show you some reps on the defensive line, you know, if you need guys there. He could give you some reps at fullback, right? If you want to waste another roster spot in fullback. So he could play multiple spots as he develops, you know, maybe into a center, but he's got to be able to have that center guard versatility to work his way onto the 53-man roster as a backup. And then you can maybe have some fun with him if he's got a uniform on game day and make him a 6th offensive lineman, maybe move him around in weird H-back roles because he's quick and he can do it and he can hit guys on the move. And that's where it'd be fun. And I bet Kyle Shanahan sees that and be like, let's have some fun with this guy. But he has to be usable at guard and center first. And so I think it might take a year on the practice squad for him to get those reps at center. And then, now he's battling with Dohnovan West, and he's battling with Brendel, and he's battling with whoever they bring in next year on the offensive line. If they maybe they draft a second round center next year, who knows? So it's going to be really interesting at center, but I think both West and Poe have a shot. But I think they probably will start on the practice squad, especially Poe, just because he's never played center and he's only been a right guard. At least West, you could probably plug him into a game and he would know what he's doing at center tomorrow. So he's probably got a leg up if they did have one extra spot for a backup center on the 53-man roster.
I could see the 49ers saying, you know what, like he is kind of wrong, cross-training at the center position, and we need to get him to improve there. So let's sneak him onto the practice squad. And then another team saying, no, sir, we think he can be a legit guard in the NFL regardless. We don't care if he's not the height that you typically would like at that position. We're going to have him come on. He's going to be on our 53-man roster, and we're just going to see what happens. We're going to give him that opportunity, though, to play guard. And he's like, well, yeah, I played guard my whole life, and I've been good at it. So why try to move me to a different position? Next thing you know, he's a 12-year starter or 12-year NFL player, and you're seeing this 30 for 30 on this guy who was too short to play guard.
Too short.
Everybody doubted me. Remember Johnny Randall, right? Like, that was a guy, right, who was like undersized for a defensive tackle.
Right, yeah.
And next thing you know, he's a Hall of Famer.
I think the best comp for him is Shaq Mason, who had a nice career with the Patriots and now is in Tampa. But even him at his pro day, and a lot of the pro day numbers are very similar to Jason Poe's. 304 pounds, came in, ran a 4.99 at his pro day. But he still was short for a guard, and he was 6'1 3/4. So,
almost 6'2.
He still had almost 6'2, over an inch on Poe. So there's really no comp for Poe. Like, I can't find someone who's started recently in the NFL on the offensive line that was below 6'1". So that's the obvious thing that's missing for him. But athleticism, being able to hit guys on the move, that's fun. And he's just a fun player. You always like to have those guys that are at the end of the roster that are fun to root for. And that's why Poe has such a cult following. And it's easy to see on tape. He jumps out. It's like, wow, this guy's crazy how fast he is and gets out on the move. And he's like a ball of energy too, just because he's shorter. It's just like you can pick him out not knowing anything about football, be like, well, that guy's different. Some difference going on there.
Yeah, and again, Shaq Mason, that's the guy. When I had brought up the lack of height, there were people that referred to Shaq Mason, but like you're saying, I mean, he's almost 2 inches taller than Poe. And that's, in the sense of being closer to fitting what teams want in their interior offensive lineman from like a height threshold. Mason still fits that more than Poe. And I think he's unique from that standpoint, but definitely doesn't mean that he can't work out.
No, that doesn't mean that he can't. It's just he's going to have to overcome it. And he's going to have to prove he's got to overcome it. And he's got to start at a lower place on the totem pole, which is going to be the practice squad, most likely for the 49ers. But it's going to be fun. I can't wait to watch those guys in the preseason and how they're utilized. And you can usually get some clues by what the depth chart looks like in preseason. If Dohnovan West starts getting some snaps earlier in games, then you might think, okay, he's got a shot to actually make the 53. Or if Poe's only playing guard and he's not playing center, or which guys may be playing multiple spots, because then they're looking at his flexibility as someone that can make the 53. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch those guys and see how everything shakes out at center, because I have no clue who the starter is going to be. I have no clue who the backup's going to be. I have no clue who's going to make the roster at center, and they need a couple of guys at least going into the season that can play. And I'm sure some of them are going to have some versatility, even if it's Brunskill that ends up being the starting center. So a lot of fun prospects to watch. Jason Poe, I know he's going to have a lot of fans just because of how interesting he is. And I do want to see him at some point in a 49ers regular season game lined up in the backfield. I just want to see that at least once. Because why else would you have the guy in your roster, right? Like, let's go. Let's have some fun. Put him in the Deebo role, flex him out. That's what you do. You go Poe in the backfield, lined up as like a fullback, and then you motion him out wide and have Deebo come into the backfield. Then you go wide receiver screen to Poe, but then he's on a corner. Then it's like a short yardage run situation. You feel me?
I like it. I like the creativity.
Kyle Shanahan, if you're watching, you're welcome for that one. That'll be a lot of fun. Can't wait to watch that in a short yardage situation. All right, thanks everybody for making Locked On 49ers your first listen. Tomorrow, Winky Wednesday, it is round 1 of our all-time 49ers draft. It's going to be a lot of fun. You are going to want to tune in all month long to that one. Talk to you then right here, Locked On 49ers.